My sister tried to steal my wedding fund, and everyone believed her. But she had no idea who really controlled the money. What happened next left the entire family speechless. My name is Emma Carter, and until last month I believed two things about my family: that my father's plans were impossible to break, and that my sister would never try to take something meant for me. I was wrong about the second one. My father passed away 4 years ago. Before Edyed, he created something he called the wedding fund. It wasn't just money. It was his way of making sure that one day, when I finally got married, I wouldn't have to worry about the cost of celebrating that moment. He used to joke about it sometimes. "Emma," he would say, leaning back in his chair with that quiet smile he always had. "When you finally pick the right man, the wedding is already paid for." Back then, it felt like one of those promises that lived somewhere far in the future. But life has a strange way of catching up with you. A few months ago, my fiancé Daniel and I finally set a date for our wedding. Nothing extravagant, just a small ceremony with close friends, family, and the house where I grew up. My mother insisted we celebrate the announcement with a family dinner that Sunday night. Everyone was there. My aunt was telling one of her endless stories about weddings in the family. My mother sat at the head of the table, quietly, listening like she always did. Daniel sat beside me, trying his best to survive the conversation with polite smiles. And across the table sat my sister, Lena. Lena had always been the confident one in the family, the kind of person who walked into a room like it already belonged to her. Halfway through dinner, she suddenly tapped her glass with a spoon. The room went quiet. "I actually have something important to say," she announced. Her voice was calm, too calm. Then, she looked straight at me. "Before Emma starts planning this wedding," Lena said, leaning back in her chair, "there's something she should probably know about the wedding fund." The table shifted with curiosity. Everyone in the family knew about that fund. My father had mentioned it many times over the years. It was supposed to stay untouched until the day I needed it. I felt Daniel glance at me. Lena smiled slightly, like someone about to reveal a secret. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "that money isn't really there anymore." The room froze. My mother blinked slowly. "What do you mean?" she asked. Lena shrugged casually, like it wasn't a big deal. "I used it," she said. A few seconds passed before anyone spoke again. "You used it," my aunt repeated. "For something important," Lena said quickly. "I needed capital for my business. And since the account was technically accessible to me too, I transferred the money months ago." Every face at the table turned toward me. Some looked shocked, some looked uncomfortable, and a few already looked like they had decided I'd just lost the wedding fund my father left for me. Lena leaned back confidently, completely satisfied with the silence she had created. "Don't worry," she added with a small smile. "You can still have a wedding. Just, maybe not the one you imagined." Daniel's hand tightened slightly around mine under the table, but I didn't react the way everyone expected. I didn't shout, I didn't argue. Instead, I just looked at Lena and nodded slowly, because while my sister thought she had taken control of the wedding fund, she had absolutely no idea who actually controlled it. The strange thing about that moment wasn't what my sister said. It was the way everyone looked at me afterward. The room had gone quiet, and every pair of eyes at the table seemed to be waiting for my reaction. Some expected anger, others expected panic. After all, Lena had just announced that the wedding fund my father created for me was gone. But I didn't feel panic. Instead, I felt something else. The quiet memory of a conversation I had with my father years ago. Daniel leaned slightly closer to me and whispered, "Emma, is she serious?" Across the table, Lena was still sitting there with the same confident expression, like someone who had just revealed the final move in a game. She looked completely satisfied with herself. "I transferred the money months ago," she repeated casually. "I needed it for my business launch. It's not like it was doing anything just sitting there." My aunt shook her head in disbelief. "Lena, that money was for your sister's wedding, and now it's an investment," Lena replied, brushing it off like it was nothing. My mother looked deeply uncomfortable, but she didn't say anything yet. Losing my father had changed her. She avoided conflict whenever possible. But what caught my attention wasn't the argument at the table. It was Lena's certainty. She believed she had already won. and that belief told me something important. She had no idea how the account actually worked. I slowly reached for my glass of water and took a sip before speaking. "Lena," I said calmly, "when exactly did you transfer the money?" She smirked slightly. "About 3 months ago, and the bank approved it without any problem," I asked. "Of course," she replied. "My name was listed on the account too. I had full access." A few people at the table nodded like that explanation made sense. But Daniel looked at me again, confused by how calm I was. The truth was, my father had never been the kind of man who left important things unprotected. Years ago, when he first told me about the wedding fund, we weren't even talking about weddings. We were sitting on the back porch of this same house while he was going through some paperwork. I remember asking him why he kept certain documents locked away in a safe. He smiled and said something I didn't fully understand at the time. "Emma," he said quietly, "money doesn't need protection from strangers. It needs protection from people who think they deserve it." I laughed back then, assuming he was joking, but he wasn't. That night he showed me the paperwork connected to the wedding fund. It wasn't just a simple bank account. It was a conditional trust account. The money could appear accessible to certain family members on paper, but the actual control of the funds depended on a specific clause written into the agreement, a clause my father had insisted on adding personally. At the time, he explained it like it was just another precaution. If anyone tried to move the money without the proper authorization, the system would trigger a review. I didn't fully understand all the legal language back then, but I remembered one part very clearly: the transfer wouldn't complete the way they expected. It would activate something else first, and sitting there at the dinner table, listening to my sister proudly explain how she had already taken the money months ago, I realized something important. Lena had no idea what she had actually triggered. Across the table, she was still smiling confidently, completely unaware of the problem she had just created for herself. Daniel leaned closer again and whispered, "Why are you so calm?" I looked at Lena for a moment before answering quietly. "Because if she really transferred that money, then the bank should be contacting her very soon." For a moment after I said that, no one at the table spoke. Lena let out a small laugh, the kind people make when they think someone is bluffing. She leaned back in her chair and folded her arms, completely unconcerned. "The bank contacting me?" she said with a smirk. "Emma, the transfer happened 3 months ago. If there was a problem, I would have heard about it by now." A few relatives nodded quietly, clearly thinking the same thing. From the outside, Lena sounded confident and logical, but confidence doesn't always mean someone understands what they've done. Daniel glanced between the two of us, still confused. My mother looked uneasy, like she could feel the tension building but didn't know where it was going. I simply rested my hands on the table and looked at my sister. "Maybe," I said calmly. Lena rolled her eyes. "There's no maybe about it. The money is already invested." That was the moment I finally decided to say the part she didn't know. "You're right about one thing," I replied. "You did move the money." The room grew quiet again. Lena's smile widened slightly, as if she thought I had just admitted defeat. "But what you don't understand," I continued, "is what happens after someone tries to move it." Her expression shifted slightly, just for a second. "What are you talking about?" I could almost hear my father's voice in my memory as I answered. Years ago, when he had shown me the documents for the wedding fund, he explained that the account was connected to a legal trust structure. It looked simple on the surface, but it had layers designed to protect the money. If someone transfers the funds without the final authorization, AID told me, pointing to a section of the agreement, the transaction automatically triggers a review process. The bank freezes the funds until the trust holder confirms the request. At the time, I didn't think much about it. I assumed no one in our family would ever try to touch that money. But now, I was sitting across from the one person who had. Back at the dinner table, Lena frowned slightly. "You're making this sound dramatic," she said. "It was just a transfer." "Not exactly," I replied. She leaned forward. "Then, explain it." So, I did. I told her that the wedding fund wasn't just sitting in a shared family account the way she believed. It was connected to a conditional trust agreement created by my father's lawyer. On paper, certain family members could see the account and even attempt transfers, but the final authority always belonged to the trust holder. Lena stared at me. "And who exactly is that supposed to be?" I held her gaze for a moment. Then I answered. My father named me. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had happened that night. My aunt slowly put down her fork. My mother looked at me with sudden realization. Even Daniel's eyes widened slightly. But Lena's reaction was the one that mattered. Her confidence began to crack. You're lying, she said quickly. I shook my head. No. For the first time that evening, she didn't look sure of herself. If that were true, she said, the bank would have stopped the transfer. That's the thing, I replied quietly. They did. Her face went pale. The money didn't disappear into your business account, I continued. When you tried to move it, the system flagged the transaction and froze the funds under a trust review. Lena stared at me as if she was trying to decide whether I was serious. And since the review requires confirmation from the trust holder, I added calmly, the bank has been waiting for me to respond. The entire table fell silent again, because in that moment, everyone realized the same thing. Lena was finally starting to understand. She hadn't taken the wedding fund. She had only triggered the mechanism designed to stop her. For the first time that night, my sister had nothing to say. Lena sat there staring at me, her confident smile completely gone. The room felt heavier now, like everyone at the table had suddenly realized that the story they thought they were watching unfold wasn't the real one. You're making this up, Lena said finally, though her voice wasn't nearly as confident as it had been before. I shook my head calmly. No, I'm not. My mother slowly leaned forward in her chair. Emma, are you saying the money is still there? In a way, I replied. It never actually left the trust. Lena immediately grabbed her phone from the table, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the quiet tapping of her nails against the glass. Then her expression changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just a small pause, like she had seen something she didn't expect. Her eyes moved across the screen again and again, scrolling, checking, rereading. What is it? My aunt asked carefully. Lena didn't answer. Her confident posture slowly disappeared as she kept staring at her phone. Finally, she lowered it slightly and looked at me. The account says the funds are under review, she said quietly. No one spoke. It also says the transfer is pending authorization from the trust holder. I folded my hands on the table. That would be me. A long silence filled the room. Lena looked down at her phone again, like she was hoping the words would somehow change if she stared at them long enough. But I already used that money, she said under her breath. I invested it. I tilted my head slightly. You plan to invest it? Her eyes snapped back up to mine. When the system flagged the transfer, I explained. The funds were frozen inside the trust account before they could leave. The bank doesn't release anything until the trust holder confirms the transaction. Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair, finally understanding what had been happening the entire time. My mother let out a quiet breath of relief. But Lena looked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath her feet wasn't as solid as she thought. So, the money is still there? My aunt asked. Yes, I said, exactly where my father left it. Lena's face turned red with frustration. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. Why would Dad set it up like that? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I remembered the moment years ago when my father had shown me the final page of the trust agreement. I had asked him the same question back then. Why so many protections? Why so many conditions? He had simply smiled and closed the folder. Because someday, said calmly, someone might try to take something that doesn't belong to them. Back at the dinner table, Lena was still staring at me, waiting for an explanation. I met her gaze and repeated the only answer that mattered. Dad set it up that way, I said quietly, to make sure the right person always had the final say. And for the first time that entire evening, my sister finally understood something she hadn't expected when she made her announcement. She had never been in control of that money, not even for a second. The room went completely silent as Lena finally realized the truth. She hadn't taken the wedding fund, she had only triggered the very mechanism my father put in place to protect it. The money was still mine, exactly as he intended. My mother looked at me with a mix of relief and pride. Daniel's hand found mine under the table. And even my aunt had that I can't believe this actually happened. Look, Lena's confidence had crumbled, replaced with the stunned silence of someone who had underestimated the person they thought was powerless. I smiled quietly to myself, remembering my father's words. Money doesn't need protection from strangers. It needs protection from people who think they deserve it. That night, I finally understood the wisdom behind his planning. Not only did I get my wedding fund back, but I also learned a valuable lesson about patience, foresight, and knowing exactly who holds the real control. And as for my sister, she would never make the mistake of underestimating me or my father's plans again.